You may have asked yourself, do narcissists ever truly pay the price? And it's easy to believe they go through life untouched, continuing to hurt others without facing consequences. But the truth is far more complicated. Some of the deepest pain doesn't scream, it whispers. And some of the harshest punishments don't come from anyone's hand, but from the silent collapse within their own distorted sense of self. The very people who once believed they were untouchable, who used cold manipulation like a weapon, who saw emotions as tools for control, eventually meet a reality they cannot bend. They challenged the wrong person. When a narcissist dares to go up against a super empath, someone who sees through the masks and refuses to be pulled into the storm, it's no longer a game. It's the beginning of their unraveling. In today's video, you'll discover the 8 most brutal emotional blows a narcissist is forced to endure when they realize their power no longer works, and the person they once labeled as supply becomes the very reminder of their greatest failure, not because of love, but because they lost control. If you've ever been wounded by a narcissist, if you've had to hold yourself together in a relationship where love was twisted into a weapon, then this video is for you. This isn't just a list, it's a mirror. A reminder that you were never weak. You were silently fighting a war most people don't even see. So hit subscribe and stay with us until the very end, because what you're about to hear might just make you see your past not through pain, but with a profound sense of pride that you survived and they no longer rule your mind. 1. Sign number 1. The pain of losing control to a super empath. They never thought it could happen, because in the narcissist's world, they're the ones controlling the game. They enter your life like a seductive breeze saying all the right things, making you feel seen, cherished, and understood. But that's just the first phase, the baiting stage, where they lure you into an invisible web. And once you're entangled, they begin to distort reality bit by bit, making you doubt yourself, sacrifice yourself, and call it love. They're used to manipulating emotions. They feed off your pain, your insecurity, and your constant search for validation from them. That's their supply. Not love, power. And they believe everyone breaks the same way, that if they fracture you long enough, you'll melt like the ones before. But then, they meet you. Someone different. Someone who doesn't react the way they expect. Someone who hurts but doesn't bend. Someone who sees the game and has too much compassion to play it. And that's when the nightmare begins. Not for you, but for them. People don't talk about this enough, that narcissists aren't afraid of losing you, until they realize they can no longer reach inside your mind. They don't grieve your departure. They grieve the fact that they can't hurt you anymore. And that grief doesn't come like a storm, it seeps in slowly. It drains them, leaves them empty, directionless, eventually meaningless. The super empath doesn't respond with rage. They respond with silence. With a piercing, calm gaze that carries no hate, with a quiet withdrawal, not screaming, "I deserve better," but simply walking away. And that calm is the deepest cut of all. Because narcissists are used to a script. Their target cries, begs, returns, gets rehooked. But this time there's no return, no drama, no emotions left to harvest. There's nothing, just silence. That's when they begin to unravel. They hoover, send cryptic texts, use new people to trigger jealousy. They vent, blame, twist the story. But nothing works. Because what they don't understand is this: super empaths don't walk away because they stopped loving. They walk away because they saw the truth. And once you see the truth, you can't pretend you're blind anymore. And when the narcissist realizes that all their old tactics, games, and psychological tricks no longer work, that's the first blow to the ego. a blow that makes no noise, but echoes for a long, long time. You need to understand this. For a narcissist, failure isn't losing a person. Failure is losing control of the narrative. It's not being able to shape your emotions to their liking anymore. It's losing the ability to remain the main character in your mind. And the super empath, in the most peaceful, grounded way, has killed that identity, not with war, but with awakening. And the cruelest part: the narcissist will never admit this defeat to anyone. They'll tell others you went crazy, that you changed, that you betrayed them. They'll spin a new story where they're still the noble victim. But inside, when night falls and there's no one left to perform for, they know. They know they lost. And they lost quietly, painfully. Because when you no longer need them, not out of hate, but because you've outgrown the wound you've done, the one thing they never expected, you reclaimed your power without ever needing a fight. That is why the super empath is a narcissist's final nightmare. Not because they attack, but because they refuse to play. And that drives the narcissist insane, because when they can't manipulate you, they no longer know who they are. 2. Sign number 2. The pain of being unmasked by a super empath. A narcissist doesn't fear being looked at. They fear being seen. Their entire identity is built on a meticulously crafted mask, charming, sophisticated, selfless, magnetic kind. They're masters of image shape-shifting between roles depending on the audience. To one person, they're the martyr. To another, the misunderstood soul. But there is one gaze they cannot withstand: the gaze of a super empath. A super empath doesn't need evidence. They don't need to dig up the past, cross-examine every word, or catch them in a lie. They just look, and they know. They sense when the words don't match the energy. They feel the inconsistency before it's ever spoken. And for a narcissist, someone used to living in a crowd that never sees through the act, it feels like being exposed. Not through accusation, but through presence. Through the quiet, grounded awareness of someone who cannot be fooled. And the pain isn't public humiliation. It's the silent, suffocating realization that you've seen who they really are and still chose not to be manipulated by it. To a narcissist, the worst fate isn't being hated. It's being emotionally unresponsive once you've seen the truth. You didn't scream. You didn't blast them online. You didn't beg for justice. You just stood there looking straight into them without fear. And in that look, they saw themselves, not the persona they constructed, but the raw, insecure, desperate, fractured soul they've been running from all their lives. They hate you not because you hurt them, but because you saw them, truly saw them, and they don't know what to do with that. Every trick they've ever used no longer works. They cry you remain calm. They blame you, stay grounded. They beg you, simply look at them. And it's that unshakable gaze that drives them mad. Because in the narcissist's mind, they define others, no one defines them. No one sees them unless they allow it. But the super empath doesn't ask for permission. They don't need to be told they feel the truth. And that's something no one has ever done to a narcissist. Not an ex, not a therapist, not a parent. But you with empathy, not to enable, but to see you pierce the fortress they've been hiding behind since childhood. 3. Sign number 3. The pain of replacing you, but never truly replacing you. Narcissists are experts at pretending they're fine. When you walk away, they don't beg. They don't cry in public. No, they display their new supply. They jump into a fresh relationship almost instantly, posting pictures, smiling wide on social media as if you never existed. But don't be fooled by the performance. Beneath it all, they are desperately trying to convince themselves that you were never special. But the more they try to replace you, the deeper they sink into the truth. You are not someone who can be duplicated. The new person, even if they're more attractive, younger, more eager still, cannot reflect back the image that you once held up for them. Because a super empath isn't just a romantic partner. They're a mirror of the soul. They didn't worship the narcissist blindly. They were present emotionally, deep and forgiving, giving the narcissist a false sense of importance simply through genuine human connection. And when the new supply doesn't create that same emotional illusion, frustration sets in. Then disappointment. Then blame. Because the new person doesn't understand them the way you did, doesn't tolerate the same behaviors, doesn't forgive endlessly. The new person expects decency, whereas you once absorbed pain to keep the peace. And slowly, day by day, they begin to realize a terrifying truth. They'll never say out loud, "You were the best supply they ever had, and they lost it." That's where the real pain lies. Yes, they're with someone new, but deep inside, there's a hollow space that no one else can fill. Because what they lost wasn't just a relationship, it was something they never thought they'd crave: genuine, unconditional admiration from someone who saw the good in them, even when they didn't deserve it. So they start rewinding the past, reading old texts, replaying the sound of your voice in their mind. Not because they want to come back, but because they can't believe that someone who accepted them so fully is really gone. They once thought you were the clingy one, but now in the silent hollowness of a fake new romance, they're the ones secretly living off memories. And the part that hurts them most, you haven't come back. You don't look at them like they're special anymore. You don't miss them not the way they need to be missed. No one sees them the way you did. No one listens like you did. And slowly they realize what they lost wasn't just a lover. It was a rare mirror. A mirror that once made them feel powerful, now shattered with no reflection left. And now without that mirror, they are left only with themselves and the raw, unbearable truth. And for a narcissist who lives off illusion, that is a pain no one else can touch and no one else can heal. 4. Sign number 4, the wounded ego, when you no longer need to demonize them to move on. A narcissist always expects you to come back, not necessarily because you love them, but because they need to know they still exist in your emotional world. For them, your tears, your anger, your cryptic social media posts, your arguments, they're all proof that they still have power over you. Even your harshest accusations to them are comforting because they signal that you haven't really let go. But a super empath is different. You don't need to paint them as evil to justify walking away. You don't need to craft a villain to play the victim. You don't need to win the crowd to prove you were right. You just retreat quietly, no chasing, no drama, no final confrontation. And that is the narcissist's most devastating blow. You need absolutely nothing from them to reclaim your worth. Not their apology, not their understanding, not even their guilt. You let go not out of weakness, but because you no longer want to fight for someone who was never truly fighting for you. For someone who builds their identity on how others see them being left behind without explanation, without emotional fireworks, without one last monologue, is an ego collapse disguised as silence. Because if you're not lashing out, if you're not posting, if you're not arguing, then they have nothing to react to. No story to control. No script to perform. You cut the scene. You broke the cycle. You dropped the role without warning. And that's why they're forced to face the one thing they've avoided all along. A silence that carries no love and no hatred, just a closing scene where they no longer have a part to play. No one left to blame. No one left to provoke. No one left to pull them out of the void that's slowly swallowing their sense of self. The calmer you become, the louder their panic gets. The more peace you carry, the more chaos brews inside them. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did the one thing they never expected. You walked away and took the stage with you. And for a narcissist, being left inside a theater with no audience is a nightmare they have no script to survive. 5. Sign number 5, isolation. When even the people they manipulated begin to pull away. Narcissists aren't afraid of the truth. They're afraid of being left alone with the truth. At first, when you walk away, they go into damage control mode. They rush to mutual friends, family members, and even casual acquaintances, anyone who will listen to reshape the narrative in their favor. In that story, they're the victim, the one who tried so hard, the one who was too patient while you were too sensitive, too cold, or suddenly changed. They cry, they confide, they hope your friends will feel sorry for them and begin to question you. And yes, in the beginning they might get some nods of sympathy, a few consoling messages. But as time goes on, the truth begins to seep through. The people who watched quietly, who saw how much you endured, who read the exhaustion behind your eyes, start to realize that something doesn't add up. You don't have to defend yourself. Your silence speaks louder than their story ever could. And slowly, people start pulling back. No confrontations, no side-taking. Just distance, a subtle retreat from the narcissist who once controlled every angle of the spotlight. For a narcissist, that is unbearable. They don't understand why the very people they once manipulated, charmed, and emotionally swayed are no longer reacting, no longer listening, no longer showing loyalty. And suddenly they feel what they've worked their entire lives to avoid, being isolated in a room full of people they used to control. They're used to leading the crowd. Now the crowd disappears, not because someone exposed them, but because everyone finally saw through them. The more they try to retell the story, the more obvious it becomes. No one wants to hear it anymore. The more they play the wounded soul, the more they're left standing alone. Not because they've run out of words, but because their voice no longer holds credibility. And that for someone who survives on image manipulation and crowd validation is the most silent, shameful collapse of all. No one accuses them. But no one stays long enough to hear their excuses either. 6. Sign number 6. The collapse of identity, when you no longer react according to their script. A narcissist lives through roles. They don't be someone, they play someone depending on who's watching. Sometimes they're the hero, sometimes the victim, sometimes the perfect lover. But no matter which mask they wear, one thing is always true. They need someone else to play along. And you once were part of that script. Not because you were weak, but because you loved, because you believed, because you hoped that if you responded with compassion, with understanding, with patience, things would get better. But then something shifted. You changed. Not because you became cold, but because you woke up. You stopped reacting the way they expected. They provoked and you didn't fight back. They played the victim and you didn't console them. They pushed your buttons and you didn't flinch. And just like that, their entire performance crumbled. Without a responsive audience, the role loses its meaning. The narcissist doesn't know what to do with someone who no longer plays their part. They can't be the rescuer if you're not broken. They can't be the abandoned soul if you're not looking back. You stopped including them in your emotional reality, and to them, that is the death of their identity. Because when they can't control your reactions, they lose the mirror that reflects who they pretend to be. Their entire sense of self was built on others' responses. No interaction, no validation, no power. And that sends them spiraling. There's no more script, no more roles, no more audience to manipulate. Only emptiness, a fragile ego with no stage to stand on. You didn't destroy them. You simply stopped participating. And sometimes that silent refusal to play is the most powerful blow to the identity they've worked their whole lives to construct. 7. Sign number 7. A guilt. They don't know how to handle Because they can't blame you. Narcissists rarely feel guilt, at least not in the way you understand it. They're masters of deflection, of distortion, of playing the victim to avoid accountability. But here's the part no one talks about. When you don't do anything wrong, they have nowhere left to hide. You didn't react the way they expected. You didn't explode. You didn't expose them in front of others. You didn't weaponize your pain. You just walked away quietly with dignity and without any dramatic closure. And that's when a foreign emotion begins to creep in: guilt. Not the kind that leads to confession or growth, but the kind of guilt that has nowhere to go. Because you didn't fight back. You didn't give them a villain to play the victim against. You didn't create a conflict they could hijack. And so the question begins to form inside them. If you weren't the one in the wrong, could it have been me? For most people, that's the beginning of reflection. But for a narcissist, it's an identity crisis. Because their entire existence is built around running from that shadow. They need someone to blame to hold the fragile scaffolding of their ego together. But this time, there's no one left. And that's when the haunting starts. Not of you, but of your quiet integrity. They can't manipulate what won't react. They can't twist a story that gets no reply. They can't continue the performance if you've left the stage. And in that silence, for the first time in their life, they're forced to confront a terrifying truth. They may have destroyed the one good thing that ever truly saw them. No one condemns them. But the guilt remains unspoken and yet overwhelming. And for an ego built on illusion, that kind of truth is simply too much to bear. Eight. Sign number 8. The pain of watching you thrive. While they no longer exist in your memory, nothing unsettles a narcissist more than watching you truly thrive. Not pretending, not overcompensating, not flooding social media with pictures to prove you're happy, but simply being at peace. They thought you'd never get over them, that you'd forever ache endlessly, spiral, wait desperately for an apology. They imagined they were your addiction, the wound you'd never stop bleeding from. But then, day by day, they watched you stop looking in their direction. You no longer speak their name. You no longer seek closure. You don't leave bitter words behind. Instead, you rebuild with trembling hands, yes, but with unwavering resolve. You smile softly now. You return to old hobbies. You care for yourself in quiet, powerful ways that don't need an audience. And in that light, not the kind that screams for attention, but the one that glows from within, they see what hurts them most. You have forgotten them. In a way, they can never forget you. A narcissist can replace partners, but they cannot forget the one who truly saw them, and still chose love. Even if they betrayed that love, it remains a haunting memory they carry in silence. Because now they no longer see their reflection in your eyes. They're no longer someone in your story. Not the beginning, not the interruption, not the tragic ending. They're just a chapter you closed without anger, without longing. And that's what they can't comprehend. It's not that you hate them. It's that you've given them no role to play in your life anymore. No meaning, no emotional gravity, nothing left to cling to. You've let go completely. Not in rage, but in maturity. And what devastates them most isn't that you left. It's that you never looked back. Not out of cruelty, but because you've stepped beyond the pain and become someone new. And for a narcissist who lives in the past, who survives on recycling old wounds being erased from the memory of someone who once belonged to them, is the deepest cut of all.